Akio kitatum skatanawal. Greetings to you all. Another edition, another episode of this walking podcast experiment that we're doing. As you can see, we're in the middle of a nice little snowstorm here in the eastern townships in Quebec, and I'm here with my friend Raphaël Gani.
Hello everyone.
And visiting this beautiful city of Sherbrooke. So Raphaël, if you could tell the listeners who you are and where we are, that would be a good way to start. Introduce yourself.
I guess I start with where we are, because it's a walking path in Sherbrooke City, near downtown, so in the middle, main city of Eastern Township. And we are, the lake you're seeing right now is called the Lake of Nations. So when thinking about where to walk in the city, choose this spot because I come here a lot. Since I was little, with my uncle, walk around. You obviously in the summer there's shows here, music. Lots of people from Sherbrooke come around and circle. It's a circle around the lake, right in the middle of the city. And so people walk here for all kinds of different reasons. And me, I often come when there's not a lot of people, just to, walk and get my ideas straight. So that's what we're seeing right now. There's a train track, so we might see a train later on. And so I'm Raphaël Gani. Part of my city is from Sherbrooke. From my mom's side, I'm new prof at the Université Laval, specialized in history education at the secondary level, high school level. And been knowing Dwayne for almost 10 years now, as maybe some of your listeners who know Dwayne. And I know him too by his river valley walk. That's how I got introduced to Dwayne, and still walking to this day with him. And part of the reason why we're here too is Dwayne is on the walking tour in Quebec, visiting Laval 2 days ago, and Sherbrooke yesterday, and today Bishop. So hi everyone.
And next week I'm going to Maniwaki again for another visit, and then on to Abitibi. So I'm feeling really grateful to have a chance to spend all this time with Raphaël and learn some more about him and his work. So Raphaël, as you know, part of our research interests has to do with the legacies of colonialism. And of course there's a lot of different ways that people all around the world have experienced colonialism, and not just as a historic period, but as a culture, as a logic. And so part of what I'm interested in hearing from you here today is just how you at this point in your life, in your career, how do you understand your relationship to colonialism, currently, in the past? How do you think about that worldview and the influence it's had on you, your life, your work?
So I guess it's a kind of a 3 phases I had with colonialism. I haven't thought a bit about youth, and talking to that. I'm thinking here in Québec, on a un mot français qui s'appelle la colonisation. So colonization, I don't know if it's when you translate it in English, but it's not colonialism. So when I was young, elementary, even a bit in secondary, I hear a lot here in Quebec where I did my study, colonisation, which means when we study the history of Quebec, we heard about French people coming here and doing colonization, establishing, and then doing mercantilism, and having trade with indigenous, and then there was the bacterial infection epidemics,
Smallpox.
indigenous.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And so, but that was part of what they call colonisation. So that was not really, you know, for such time in my life, earlier time, that was not really colonialism. And the reason I distinguish is when I was more around 15, so here as we are in 1995 in Quebec. 1995 is the referendum. Nationalist movement trying to separate. And I start to be a bit more attuned to the political. So the second phase began with colonialism, where in history courses, the classic image in Quebec is very stereotypical, but the history prof in the secondary level, high school level, they were usually tall, bulky guy, beard, nationalist. And they will tell you about colonialism. But colonialism was the Brits, Great Britain, that was colonized, that colonized the French people after the conquest of 1759. So I had like a bit of a twist where the worldview was, I'm the colonized here.
Okay.
I'm the colonized. And the deeper I went in that, the more evidence I found, because obviously it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. There's lots of books in Quebec. The national movement has lots of books. Famous guy here in Quebec is called Falardeau. He's a guy, a filmmaker. And he wrote a book about how Quebec are being colonized, and we needed to, you know, in a way decolonize. But for him, what that meant is get rid of the Anglophone influence, the Great Britons, to separate from Canada.
Right.
So that's my second phase. And the third phase is, the more personal one is more about my 20s. When I start to question where these intellectual roots of that view of colonialism, right? That here in Quebec, French Canadian are colonized. And I end up reading Fanon, Frantz Fanon. He's a psychiatrist and was involved in the Algerian War. And what collided with my life is Frantz Fanon was one of the intellectual thinker of the Algerian Revolution during the 1960s. And he also influenced a lot of Quebecois, French-speaking nationalists with his view of the damned of the earth. Right? This view that a lot of people are marginalized, alienated, because they internalize the view that they're inferior to the colonialists. So here in Quebec, they use that as French Canadian were like pea soup. And the Brits were like imposing this image of the Pepsis, the lesser than. And in Algeria, it's kind of the same. But where it's intersecting is, I think in Algeria, I had roots too. So when I read Fanon, I'm like, oh, because my granddad actually participated in that war. And he was actually not on the side of the revolution. And so Fanon was arguing for decolonization, and sometimes through violence.
Right.
And so if you know a bit of that war, it ended up that the revolutionary in Algeria won. It was the French over there. And so they won the decolonization. But my granddad, which is a Kabyle individual living in the mountain, not speaking Arab, speaking Amazigh, and he was on the French side. He was working for the French during the revolution. And so after the revolution ended, he got imprisoned. And so that got me thinking about the effect of colonialism on him. Like he was working literally for the colonialists, but also the decolonization movement and with Fanon and his thought, the revolutionary, and let's break colonialism, but also that led to my granddad being in prison. Because, you know, when the revolution was won, the revolutionary turnaround imprison people that were not on their side. So I'm always 1 foot in, 1 foot out now with colonialism and the thought of, what do we do with it? Because I kind of saw the bad effects of it through my family, but I also see how it can be, the thinking about it can be mobilized and can lead up to like real people having real consequence in their life. So this is really a personal thing. This is where I am. And now in Quebec, there's people who I'm attuned to deal about colonialism in a way that turn the mirror on Québécois. And they say, and that's freshly new groups of scholars, part of it is Catherine La Rochelle at the University of Montreal, and they go in Québécois and say, you are the colonialist. And this is where, I'm starting to grapple with these ideas, because it's a big switch. Like I said earlier, I was raised to see French Canadian as colonized, and now this new thought about colonialism is about French Canadian were colonialists to Indigenous, to many different groups. And so that's all. I'm going all over the place, but really this is how I proceed this idea, which has, exterior collective influence on me, but also went through very deep in my family as to the role of, if you get really, intense on wanting to pursue a decolonial perspective, how it can influence people's lives. Mm-hmm. It did in my family anyway.
So I'd be interested to hear you reflect on how what you just shared, that very personal family kind of dynamic, how that has an influence on how you present yourself to your students, as a history educator. As you know, this is something that, you've heard me speak about, and certainly in my own work, it's prominent, just the way in which the story you tell about yourself, it manifests itself in the work that you do. And I think, if you think about métissage, which is, something that I think it's a sensibility that I have in my life and my work that I can't really turn on and off. It's the way I understand the world. And when I listen to you and what you just shared, part of it with the métissage ethic is that it's never just the one thing. These stories are always much more complex and much messier than we really want to believe or accept. And so how do you tell a story without choosing sides? Yeah. How do you tell a story that actually honors all of your relatives and all of the people you care about, right? So what do you have to say about that?
I guess you were using a bit of etymology. I start with my course always with my last name, which is Gani. And I'm in Quebec City, and in front of we're going to see the train.
The train coming by. Yeah. Might have to do some editing.
You wanna turn around?
It's up to you. We can keep going, or
maybe it'll be better for the sound.
Okay. Yeah. All right.
So the way I introduce myself to the student is always through my last name. And so Gani, to continue on colonialism, so my name is Gani, last name, Gani, and I spell it because I spell it all my life. It's 4 letters. For me, it's very clear. And one of the influence that I thought about this colonialism is the idea of fitting in, assimilating yourself into. And so in Quebec, most of the time when I say my last name, they say Gagné, because Gagné is a very common name in Quebec, so they Quebecize it. So I always have to bring it back. And in the effort of bringing it back, I'm reminded of, a bit of the difference I had. And the intricacy of that is the Gani part is the Kabyle part, is the part of the mountain. But my granddad, as I told you before, was on the side of the colonialist, and he really adopted that mind view. And he didn't really transmitted a lot of things. He didn't want us to be like Kabyle. He wanted us to be French. He wanted to fit in society.
Mm-hmm.
So when I tell you this story because I tell that to my students, you know, and when I introduce myself, I have a class at Université Laval. It's mostly people from the region. You know, there's difference in the class, but we would not say necessarily a lot of cultural differences.
Mm-hmm.
And I introduced this because I think they might wonder, just like a lot of people wonder when they see my name, where this guy came from. So I introduced that already before they ask. I say, you know, Gani, you know, where do you think that came from? And then I got different answer. And I tell a bit that story where, you know, for me, not having really been passed down that story of Gani wanting to fit in, the question that became with me, and that's why I'm here today in this role of professor, I think, is because I then start to study society and identity as a question, not a given. Because my last name was not given to me. It was just your Gani, but trying to study. So my family, they end up in France after that, and then my dad in Quebec. And they always when they try to fit in, and it's really colonial, like trying to fit in this colonial society. They were like, you need to study it. You need to study the codes in order to fit in. So since it was not a given to me, I always question that side. Mm-hmm. So when I see Quebec, when I see Canada, for me, it's a question. What is Quebec? And when I talk to my mom, which I talked to a bit earlier, she's from the surrounding here in Sherbrooke. For her, she's Quebecois, French, Canadian, deep roots. And she's like, you question a lot about Quebecois. I'm not questioning myself. No, this is a given for me.
Right.
So that's how I explain to my student about how to be, maybe I guess I'm trying to say to them, the underlying message is like, be curious. Like or in didactics, we say, problematize.
Oh yeah.
Like not necessarily do that as a given. So that's what I do to introduce myself, and trying to just talk about my name and tell the story. Tell the story of not necessarily the entire story, but and I feel that, and I've heard you, as I said earlier, you've been here a couple of days and talking about building relation. I'm trying to say to them also that when you teach history, it's also about, you know, telling story, but it's also being relatable, creating relation. Mm. And what I found is, in a very little, maybe anti-colonial move that I do, is I'm trying to build relation with my students, say, hey, know me. I'm trying to know you too. What's your name? Uh-huh. And so this year I made an activity where people like to explain a story about their name. Their first name, their last name. Tell us why you came to be named like that. And so through sharing story, you build relation. And then it's slowly but surely, you see me coming, but you know, then history, you need to use history to explain it.
Right.
And so you create relation in the class through the story to then learning from each other, or last name or story that was given to us. Some of them has more complex story than other, and then moving on, trying to use that, mobilize that to then learn about history and other people's lives and different things we learn in history.
I like that, you know, and some of the assignments that I've been a part of, you know, activities asked the students to do, we call it the call grandma assignment, because the students are struggling with, you know, what to say about themselves or their name or whatever it is, and sometimes someone will come in and say, well, I finally called my grandma, and that's when we go, okay, we have success now. They decided that they needed to check in with their family. That's like a measure of how well we're doing. Yeah. If we provoke them enough that they call grandma, then we're making...
And entertain that relation.
Right, yeah. Right. But I like what you said about, you know, that curiosity. I think it's such an underrated kind of motivation. And that question, for example, what is Quebec? It's such an interesting question. I'm sure your students are a bit are a bit bewildered when they're asked that by their history prof. But I wanted to switch a little bit, and we know each other well enough. You know that part of my interest is in thinking about those moments we have in our lives and our work when we start to understand differently what the problem is or what the struggle is. And in this case, we use that phrase, unlearning colonialism, right? And for me, I think about how intellectual most of our experience is, and the cognitive processes we have. And we are cognitive beings, but the emotion, the spirit, our bodies, and those shifts that we have. And so I'm hoping you could say something about experiences you've had that where you're aware that it caused you to understand differently what colonialism is, or what the struggle is with this legacy, this shared legacy that we have.
I think it's in relation to your coming in Quebec. I mean, we've been talking that for a long time. So part of my interest in stories and emotion is how the language we use frame the story we tell. And by language, I mean the French language, the English language. Obviously, we're speaking English right now.
Yeah.
So my first thought is, how's that influence the way we relate to each other, the way we are able to connect? Mm-hmm. And so I went very deep in there, in my thesis, even some anger, because I went to, I did my thesis on Alberta, and went to Alberta as a Quebecois. And as I tell earlier in the podcast, I've been told that, the story of Canada is Anglophone versus Francophone. Uh-huh. And Anglophone, supersede. I know that this is a story. Obviously, there's a lot more to it, but that's what I've learned. And so, and so obviously through the years, I've been curious to know how people whether they understand the same thing, whether they see that how language create condition for emotion to arise, story. And I went to Alberta and started talking about Anglophone. Huh. People look at me and say, what are you talking about? We're not Anglophone. And I was puzzled. I was even mad. I say, are you not realizing that language frame the way you talk to me, the way I talk to you? Yeah. So you see my voice, I get a bit. For my girlfriend's working at Bishop, she always say to me, get off your box. I hear her right now, get off your box. Maybe it's not. Other scholar too, Tim Stanley, have led me to think, well, there's maybe reason for that, right? That they don't call themselves Anglophone. And it's okay. And some of the learning I got from you, Dwayne, is this idea that told me a story about, when you understand something, when you relate to people in a other than colonial way of being, maybe language is not necessarily, should not be given that importance. It's been imposed on us, and so maybe we start listening. Mm-hmm. And first of all, start listening to each other, but also part of your teaching is listening to the non-human component, or the living, the tree or the land. So that's where I found when I stopped sticking on language and as a barrier and trying to, tell people, don't you notice you're when I stopped doing that, and think I'm trying hard, and then listening, but also maybe get a deeper understanding over and above language. Mm-hmm. And that's where emotion arises. I've been thinking about that recently, about how new emotion arise, because I'm not so sticking in the parameter of the game that was giving to us, which is language. Uh-huh. Here you speak English, here you speak French. Even in my family from the Kabyle side, they don't speak French, but they got to speak French because of the French in Algeria. Right. So these languages were imposed, and now in Canada, as you know, we've been fighting years and years over a language, but they were giving to us, they were imposed. So therefore, maybe that's, I kind of see the key in getting a bit, like my girlfriend would say, out of my box, or out of my head, as you'll see, over the eyebrows, and just, listening to different things, and trying to see relation over and above language. I think it create condition for at least new emotion for me to arise, and new ways of trying to navigate the world and relations in it.
One of the things I've really enjoyed about this tour here in Quebec that you helped arrange for me, so thank you for that. But of course, First Nations people have a different relationship to Quebec society than they do to Canadian society, and the history is different here. And so there's a lot that I have to learn, and so I really appreciated, learning about the Wyandot, the Innu, the Wabanaki, a lot of histories and understandings and languages, cultures that I didn't have much exposure to. But I just wanted to give you a chance I know you've just been at Laval for a few years now, but what are your thoughts on what you expect the ongoing role of First Nations people and their history and language will have in your work?
I've just met Innu student Yasmin, and her dad is Egyptian, Yasmin Fontaine, and her mom is Innu from around Maliotenam, in around Sept-Îles area, up north here. Not necessarily north, but up the river. And the role. She made it clear. Through inviting you, I got to meet different people. Obviously, sharing different voice. Trying to, for you to meet different people, and I've learned from that. And one thing I've learned from Yasmin is, but what are you doing for Indigenous students? And this is just at the personal level. I know the university is trying to create a space for them. The MasterCard is giving us at Université Laval millions, around 5, to create a space. But just where I am, just integrating this. I'm really into trying to get people together and talk or act together. But Yasmin really challenged me into what are you doing for Indigenous students? And one thing I shared with you yesterday is I know you, and I saw she came into your presentation, and I'm like, how about creating a bridge for maybe her to come to Alberta and do some walking there? How about creating that's what I'm working on right now. It's creating a path around the campus that we could get different Indigenous knowledge being valued, being shared, but also maybe a different, not a different path, but a path that could also help Indigenous student regenerate through walking in their very specific way. That's what I've learned from Yasmin and other people, is because you came here in the team of you coming here, it's like walking with Dwayne. Part of it because of your article in JCAX on the Wakitoan imagination that has been now translated in French, so that give us an excuse to make you come here, and I think we can share it. It's available, open access, and this idea of walking is different from Yasmin and for me, and so she walks to reconnects with her ancestor, and this. So the first thing I will say is maybe think that's where I am in my path, trying to make her continue her path, make other students, give them the opportunity, either to connection I have or people I know like you, or on the campus, the project I'm working on. So to maybe have a place that they can feel connected, because she said, I've heard others say that it's a very disconnecting place, the university as a place.
Right.
They go off their community, they come in a place that's, even if there's like recognition and they're going to build a new building, but it's still very boxy, put people in box. So I guess trying to connect, that I will say. I have other ideas, but to put these Indigenous students in there, not necessarily help them, but be there and so they continue to walk and see different things and enable them to walk, to continue walking. And by enabling, I mean just, you know, being there, listening, and yeah, that's what I've been recently been attuned part of it, because you came and trying to get you to heard different voices, and they went through me too. So here I am.
Well, yeah, walking. I mean, I'm always cautious not to make it a romantic thing. Like if everybody would just walk together, then the world would be wonderful and all that kind of simplistic stuff. But yeah, it just makes me happy just thinking about people being supported to walk in the ways that they need to.
Yeah.
Because it's meant so much to me in my life. And yeah, Yasmin, it was really good to meet her and just to think about how she walks in her ancestral territory. So there's good connections there. Well, I think we should probably turn back.
Yeah.
So merci beaucoup.
Yes, my friend. That's a good talk.
That was good.